For survivors of attempted kidnapping, how did you escape? A guy at a club and his mix of friends was insistent about coming back to the party. I politely declined. Didn't think much of it. They got increasingly aggressive about it to a physical extent, and I left walking back home. I realized they were following me in their car, dashed down the road through the mid-path of a packed apartment complex, and just started yelling like crazy. No one actually responded or poked their head out, or maybe they just didn't hear me, but it sparked the escape reflex of the creeps, and I hid in a bush until my heart slowed down, jumped the fence of someone's property, risky in its own right, wandered through a field avoiding the main roads, and circled back to a side street to home. Lucky I knew the area better than they did. My mom was always paranoid someone would kidnap us kids from the yard. We used to play outside while she worked from home. We were 10, 8, and 6 at this time. She paid our neighbor's teenage daughter to sit in the yard and watch us. Mostly she just ignored us and read a magazine with her headphones on and Walkman playing, but she was nice to us. I remember thinking this was stupid, and Mom was right there anyway, so why did I? Basically, a teenager needs to be babysat. Lol. One day we were all up in our treehouse, being jerks to our babysitter and unplugging her headset cord while she was trying to nap. A man and woman came into the yard via the side gate. They started talking to the youngest sibling, trying to get her to climb down. The babysitter screamed for help, but no one came. She ended up throwing the ladder from the treehouse over our back fence into her own yard and made us all climb into her yard with her dog, who was going insane at the fence. We ended up locked in her house, and she called the police. My mom didn't hear any of the commotions from inside the house, and she won't speak about it even now that we are all adults. Never complained about my babysitter after that, though I don't know for sure what this was, but I was riding my bike home alone, cutting through a deserted middle school and high school parking lots during the summer. A man in a station wagon pulled up and offered me a ride home. I never stopped pedaling, just said, "No, I'm fine." He pressed several times, saying he could fit my bike in his car. It was no big deal. I kept saying no. He gave up and left. I don't know if it was just a genuine helpful guy. This was the late 70s or the early 80s, so it wasn't yet a completely extinct practice that strangers might offer each other rides or a potential kidnapper. My wife told me that when she was just a teenager, she got in a cab, and the driver just abducted her. He didn't take her to her destination. Instead, he took her to a hotel room. She was really scared, but she kind of started playing along a little and pretended that she was interested and into it. Then he laid down on the bed, and she said something like, "Oh, I'm hungry, can we order a pizza first?" And the cab driver said okay, so she picked up the phone while she was dialing. He wasn't paying attention, so she disconnected the cable. Then she said, "You know, I think the phone is broken. Let me go to the front desk to tell them, and I'll order the pizza while I'm there." So he says okay, sure. She went to the front desk and told them what was happening. They called the cops. The cops came and hauled him away. It was the 90s in Asia. I wasn't old enough to go to school yet, so my grandma took care of me while my parents were at work. My grandma had a little convenience store, and one day, 2 men approached her. One was in his 30s and the other was a short old man with white hair. They were carrying those hand-weave basket pig cage. They asked my grandma if I was for sale. She told them to bug her off while my grandma was distracted. They snatched me and I was carried away. I was kicking and screaming until they knocked me out. One of the neighbors saw me and alerted my grandma. My grandma rode her bicycle down the main street looking for me. She argued and threatened them to get me back if it wasn't for my grandma and her stubborn fierceness. I wouldn't be here. She passed away in 2016. Love you and miss you, Grandma. I was drugged at a small town bar, went to the bartender and asked what drink she had given me. She recited what I had ordered. I told her. I asked because I'm not feeling well. Suddenly, it was like the world was spinning on its head. I sat at my seat because she said she hadn't seen anyone near my table / drink. Cool, whatever. It's getting worse and I'm feeling the worst I've ever felt in my life. I don't really remember what happened, but a guy had led me outside and we were getting in a car. I remember hearing bracelet and seeing handcuffs clink on my tiny ass wrist. My first response was to scream, kick anything. I already felt like vomiting and pooping, so in my panic of scream and writhing around, drawing a lot of attention from a closed car. Apparently I stopped for a second and here, finally you, before I vomited all of the back seat myself, and I threw myself forward to cover him as well. At this the point, I had no control between vomiting and screaming as loud. It was good to vomit more. My drug self was like it can't get worse for me, and I literally pulled my pants down and shot as my body saw fit. The guy never left the parking lot because of the commotion I raised. I remember hearing people banging on the windows and the guy freaking out, so I started screaming. Helped the best I could. The guy was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping and drugging me with meth and fat that they found on as a person blessed be the big man Mike who carried my vomit poop cover self to the gym next to the bar where they let me shower and change when I was 8 years old. If I had just moved to a new house that was directly across the street from the school I would be starting in just a month or two, I would sometimes go to school and play by myself for a bit. One time I was headed back home when I was approached and surrounded by a group of boys in their early teens. They told me to come to hang out at their house. I shook my head and tried to run home but was blocked by the second oldest. Pulls out of $20 and tells me that I can have it once we get to their house. I think for a moment and decline again, but I'm blocked again from leaving. My heart is racing and I keep looking longing at my house. The boy with the money holds it out to me and says to take it and he'll give me another $20 at the house. It's in his wallet. He forgot it. The oldest chimes in telling me I would be able to buy a lot of candy with that money. I hesitate and start to reach my hand out to take the money and then see my chance to run between two of the boys and escape. They yelled and tried to grab me, but I made it home. I saw some of them on occasion, but I always stayed far away, and they seemed to have forgotten about me. Later learned that the house they were trying to take me to belonged to a drug and addicted mother who was rarely home and her sons just did whatever they wanted. I was 12, and some guy was walking towards me after school. He said, "Hey there, kiddo. You remember me, don't you? Mom told me to take you home." I thought, that's the oldest trick in the book. My parents told me if this ever happened, one thing I could do was run to the nearest adult and yell mom or dad. So that's what I did. A teacher was walking into the school and I said, "Oh dad, there you are." The guy got out of there. I explained to the teacher why I did what I did. We didn't get his plate number. Sadly enough, when I was very little, my dad took my sister and I on a river camping trip for a few days. We got to the little rural the town at the end of the river where a buddy left our truck and trailer at the boat launch for us. My sister was old enough to sort of help dad with loading the boat, hold the rope so it doesn't float away while we back up, etc. But I was too little to really do much, so I started wandering around looking for stuff. I found a dead bumblebee and I really love bumblebees, so I decided to bury it in a little grave to pay respects. I found a patch of flowers near the edge of the boat launched by the woods. I crouched down, completely absorbed by my trying to make a little cross for a headstone out of 2 twigs and a bit of grass, when suddenly I hear my dad's deep booming voice scream, "Hey!" He was a good 10 yards away from me, but it was so loud I could feel it in my chest, and I jumped and spun around towards him. He is already halfway to me, running. His face looks scary. He looks so mad, so focused, and he's looking over my shoulder instead of at me. I run over to him, no idea what's happening, but scared that I'd at least get in trouble if I didn't go over to him right away. He picks me up and puts both me and my sister into the truck to finish loading by himself. Apparently, a man tried to take me. I never even knew he was their dad. Caught sight of him just as he began lunging towards me and scared him off. I wouldn't have known until I was already gone if he hadn't been so aware. Watch your kids. It only takes a second. I was too young to remember, but my mom was crossing the street with me as a 1-year-old in one arm and a bag of McDonald's in another. A strange man came up to her, calling me his nephew, and tried to snatch me from her arms in the middle of the street. My mom dropped the food, but by this point he started to have a grip on me. Luckily he gave up, probably because of the attention he was beginning to draw to himself. My mom tells me there were police sitting right across the street and they just ignored her screams. In the very obvious attempted kidnapping happening, my best friend tricked me into hanging out with her after I moved to another post to be closer to her. Once I got there, she introduced me to her friend, then slipped out of the house. When I asked about it, he laughed and said, "You really thought she was your friend? She owes me money and you're her payment. I've known about you for months." None of this was coincidental. Then proceeded to pull up pics of me in conversations between the two. After a lot of initial crying and begging, I told him I needed to go to her house to get my stuff on my phone. He told me he would get me all the new stuff and I didn't need it. Why would I go back to her? I immediately told him that he was right. I didn't want to go back to her, that he really saved me from her cause. What kind of friend would sell me to someone? I told him that he was going to take care of me and I knew that I just needed my phone to let my parents know I was okay and wouldn't see them for a bit or they'd get worried and file a report. After much convincing, he agreed to let I go to her house around the corner to grab my stuff and come back. I took off running. Once I got around the corner, had to take 2 buses and 2 trains to get home. I haven't had a close friend since. So, when I was 17, my crazy rich European mom forced me to sign a contract with a company in South Africa, where they added they being my parents would pay crazy money for me to board with and work for a conservation org. I didn't want to go, but she was convinced it would be good for me. She'd emailed back and forth with this woman for weeks, if not months, behind my back, and been convinced by how the woman also had kids when I arrive in South Africa. It turns out to be a scam. There's no work. The longer I stay, the weirder it gets. I'm living alone with a middle-aged man in an empty mega luxury house on a golf estate. They are con artists who are banned from various European countries, as I later learned, fake names and all. The wife and their 2 kids returned from holidays in Switzerland after a couple of weeks. At first, they were acting friendly, but they took all my papers and documents, passport, paid health insurance card. They blocked my visa process, which later resulted in me being an illegal immigrant and being blacklisted from South Africa. I want to go home, but my parents don't let me come back. My mom is crazy. There was one guy in this situation who was good and also being scammed by them, and he saved me. Let's call him to EFF. I was unaware of the gravity of the situation. I was a suicidal, depressed 17-year-old kid. A lot of crazy came out later. These people were meeting Jeff's wife alone and threatening her and scaring her. They were scamming left and right and being shady. One day, Jeff rocks up when I am in the house by myself. He tells me to just pack a backpack quickly and get in the car. He drove me to his home, where he basically just took me into his family, and he went back later to get my possessions. I later found out that he went full ape on these people and pulled a door off its hinges during altercations to get my papers and documents back. He involved the police because they didn't want to return my papers. Shortly after, those guys disappeared alongside all the appliances, electronics, and furniture from the luxury house, which wasn't theirs. I ended up cutting my family off and living with Jeff, his wife, and his kids for 2 years. I was gonna live my life there, but after 2 years, my missing visa caused me to get deported basically, and I never considered it kidnapping until I told the story to someone, and they said, well, basically, you were almost kidnapped. I still don't know WF it was, but I still remember how tense Jeff was when he told me to grab what I couldn't get in the car. Thanks for listening. The subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more things you don't want to know. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories.